Okay, here we are again with Rodney Jackson. And this is what we're describing as kind of a do-over, a mulligan. The last time Rodney was very professional and very strategic in terms of how he shared some of his personal stories. So we thought we'd do part two here. So Rodney, I know that just to set this up for our audience here, the conversations we have from a business standpoint somehow resonates in one particular way, but the conversations that we're having that I hope to have now is one that we would have perhaps with family and friends. So if we were to assume that you're a new friend, how would it best um, start in terms of introducing yourself as a new friend? What would you say to a person that you were meeting for the first time and were engaging in conversation? That's kind of the
All
context
right.
that I'd like to
Well,
talk.
Ron, if I was meeting you on the golf course after getting a mulligan, I would want to ask you, do I get a mulligan on every hole or just the first tee box?
Well, that depends on the group that you play with. We, in my golfing career, we used to have what's called a Baker Morgan. And that was started by a couple of friends of mine that you could use your Baker Morgan anytime you wanted to. You would just
There
call
you
it
go.
Baker Morgan.
Well,
So,
I hope it's only once on this one. Thanks for the mulligan. I appreciate it. But your question is, how would I introduce myself as to a new friend?
yes.
Well, gosh, Rodney Jackson, and gosh, I live here in San Diego with my beautiful bride of, gosh, 27 years. I better get that right. We've got an anniversary this month with Leah, and got two kids, two grown kids now that are doing really well back in Texas and South Carolina, and just enjoying life. Uh,
So career-wise, you know, a lot of times people say, gee, what kind of work do you do? So just to briefly touch on that a bit without going too deep, what kind of work do you do?
Executive coaching is the primary focus. Also includes leadership and management development. My background's in organizational development and been doing quite a bit of working with leaders over the last, pretty much the last decades. So a lot of executive coaching, which is really about helping leaders realize their potential. The more they can get out of their people, working through people, the better they are and the more effective they are. So that's a really fulfilling part of what I get to do every day.
So where are you from originally? You don't sound like you have a accent per se. Where were you born and raised?
So that living in Southern California doesn't count as a Southern accent. Is that what you're saying there, Ron? From San Angelo, Texas, originally. Grew up out in West Texas, called the Concho Valley. Lived there until I graduated from high school, and then went off to Austin, University of Texas. But a Texan for my first 30 years of life, living in Texas before moving out to California.
And what did you study at UT there?
Studied organizational communications there at the time, and went on, got my master's in organizational development at Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara.
And then when did you come out to San Diego then?
Well, originally out to California back in 1990. And then to San Diego, uh, that was 2001.
Hmm. And what keeps you in San Diego as compared to going back to Texas or any place else that you think would be um, beneficial to you and your family?
Well, staying here in California, in San Diego, I guess I get to have breakfast with you every Tuesday morning, Ron. Our traditional little gathering, which is always fun and insightful. I'm here in California. I married a Minnesota farm girl who doesn't think Texas is God's country, so we kind of compromise and live here in San Diego. So who knows? We might head back there someday, but for now, it looks like we're going to be living close to the coast here for some time.
How did you and your bride meet?
We really weren't looking at the time, I guess you'd say. We had been involved in different dating relationships. We were in our mid 30s at the time. I had just moved back to Northern California. Leah had just moved to Northern California after being in Chicago for a while, and we just met one night up at a singles group at Menlo Park Presbyterian Church.
Hmm.
And I think we kind of knew it that night that this would be a long-term relationship, which it has been.
So did you sweep Leah off her feet, or did she stun you with her personality and her beauty?
Well, she did certainly was both of that. I definitely married up, I guess you'd say. But yeah, we've been pretty compatible, certainly soulmates.
So with a new friend that if we were to imagine this is how we were communicating, that person would say, who is the real Rodney Jackson? Are you as as you appear to be, or is there another side of you that the average person wouldn't have an opportunity to meet right away?
That's a good question. Things are in the eye of the beholder. My hope, of course, is that people would see me as, real and authentic. That's my hope in the work that I do. We talk a lot about helping people be authentic and be real. So I hope the feedback from others would be that I'm a real person.
So if you were to describe yourself in one word, how would you how would you describe yourself? And let me just mention this is that even though this is an interview, quote unquote, I really hope that it's also a conversation. So if you have any questions that you have of me, I'm happy to participate. So in terms of a word that would describe Rodney Jackson, what would you suggest would be your word?
I can tell you what I'd want it to be. I'd want it to be faithful.
Can you put that in the context, faithful? Um,
Yeah,
or
faithful to Leah, faithful to my family and my children, and certainly faithful to God. Sort of living out, demonstrated integrity, hopefully, in all that I do. My hope is I can certainly meet that mark. None of us are perfect, of course, but hopefully that would be a word that people would describe me.
so in terms of your uh, journey through life, whether it's business, personal life, dealing as a husband, as a sibling, as a son, how's that journey been for you over the last few decades?
It's been a learning journey, no doubt about that. Things that we I it's important. I believe certainly I know with my clients and the way I like to operate is to really begin with the end in mind, is to have have an idea, have a vision of what you want your life to be. Yet life doesn't always happen exactly the way you want. There are going to be things that happen that you have to deal with and you have to respond to. Uh, I think the blessing, the thing that Leah and I have been blessed with is that, we had an idea. I was, of course, teaching the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People about the time that we were getting to know each other and meet each other. So we put together a mission statement,
Hmm.
for our marriage. We put together a few values, and it's interesting when you do that. You begin with the end in mind. It's amazing how many things came true. I mean, little things like how many kids we were going to have, what their names were going to be, what we wanted to be doing financially, and the type of work that we wanted to do. So at least we had a plan, and having a plan, I think, is really important. However, things didn't always turn out that way, dealing with, some unexpected things,
Talk about
illness.
those, Rodney. What kind of challenges have you had? How many years have you been married now?
We've been married, well, let's see, since 1997.
So since 1997, what kind of challenges have you and Leah has have you dealt with?
Sure. Yeah, challenges such as layoff exactly 30 days after my son was born,
Hmm.
Cisco Systems, and just wasn't any fault of my own. It just everybody that was the during the uh, dot com era at the early days of the internet. You remember those days, I'm sure. But all of a sudden, everybody stopped buying capital equipment, and Cisco laid off thousands of people. And I can remember Caleb was exactly 30 days old.
Wow.
Watched
Wow.
the stock option go from $120 a share to $20 a share in a matter of 4 or 5 months, and that felt devastating to lose some money on paper, and to sort of deal with that loss. I loved working there, but that was a difficult time.
So how did you
How,
handle how did you and Leah as a team handle that? What kind of issues did you learn how to communicate with each other in
you
that
know, it,
initial?
what's interesting, Ron, because it actually happened in about this time of year. It actually happened in a May, but I'm always reminded of it about this time of year. And remember my initial reaction. I actually told a friend of mine before I told Leah. I was on my way home. I called my friend Tom. I met with him. Uh, I forget where it was now, but I just said, look, you know me, my tendency to get discouraged and melancholy. I need you to help me get up every day because I just lost my job at
Hmm.
Cisco.
Hmm.
And I remember telling him and just having sort of that, I call it a lifeline, and just, somebody to kind of help me through this change and transition because I knew it was a big one. So I went home and told Leah, and Leah, supportive as she is, she said, we'll figure this out. God's got this. We'll figure it out. Of course, I was on a mission after that. 2 kids, the breadwinner in the family, and of course, growing up as you know, a man in West Texas, we thought it's really our role, our calling to take care of our families. So I didn't relent. Uh, had 6 months severance, but I had a job lined up in 2 months,
Wow.
and came down here to go to work for a company, Peregrine Systems, which, as you know, uh, blew itself up, filed for bankruptcy. CEO went to prison, and here we were again, faced with another possible lay. I wasn't laid off. I ended up leaving, but it was pretty much a shell of a company. but that was a trying time, and I was thinking about this just actually literally this morning, to thinking about what was that like. And I remember I didn't have any choice but to get up and look every day. This was back during the early days. Monster.com, I remember every morning I was on Monster. And that's how I found my job here at Peregrine.
So to back up a second, when
Sure.
you first got laid off from Cisco, uh, before you told Leah, you called your friend Tom. That seems to say that you find relationships really important in terms of who can you share this news with, particularly if you are also self-aware and you mentioned the word melancholy and so forth. Is that a suggestion that you'd have or that you've utilized in the years subsequent to that when things happen and um, things don't go according to plan?
Yeah. And, without sounding academic again, there is something that comes to mind that helps me. And I remember even a few years before that, learning about change and transition and realizing that what's most difficult for people is not an ending uh, and not the beginning of something new, but it's the neutral zone, the thing that happens between an ending and a beginning. And a job ended and a new one hadn't started. And I had a couple of kids and a family and a mortgage. And it's like, okay, I got to get through this. And when you're in that neutral zone, you're in that difficult part. That's when you've got to set some short-term goals. That's when you got to get up every day. That's when you have to have something to get you going moment after moment. So just knowing that academically and knowing a bit of myself, I knew that I needed to have somebody to kind of, you know, put a little feet to the fire, kick me in the butt a little bit, and keep me going. And that was a lifeline.
Well, mental health is something that, regardless of your station in life, regardless of your generation, that's anxiety, um, depression, addiction. These are all mental health issues that people have to figure out how to confront them. You sound like you had a pretty good idea, mental health wise, who to reach out to and even going forward now. What advice would you give to Gen Z, the younger people your kids' age, or even people that are older that have
Sure.
gone through life-changing experiences? What's your secret to how you've dealt with these?
No, I don't know if it's a secret. And, as I've personally gotten older, it's interesting how I'll even share with Leah sometimes. It's interesting how I don't feel as much anxiety as I used to. I don't feel as melancholy. Some of that might just be growing up. Some of that might be having a little bit less, a fewer less burden, a fewer less challenges, you know, less of a mortgage, fewer car payments. Kids are out of college now.
Mhm.
So it's a bit of different lens. But what I would say for someone at the age and stage that you're at is relationships are vital. Relationships are critical. Don't isolate yourself. I used to tell my kids this. I said, there seems to be an increase in kids in school that are depressed, that feel uh, that they've lost hope. I said, don't ever be at a place where you feel like you've lost hope, but there's nobody there that cares. Is if you ever get to feeling that way, give us a call, please. We'll be there.
How do you
And if you,
choose your friends, Rodney? Do your friends choose you or do you choose your friends?
I seems like it's mutual.
To drill down a little bit in that regard, the saying of birds of a feather flock together, or you are who your friends are. When you look at your group of friends, your cohort, as it were, is there anything in common that you see that other people would get a hint from as to how they would choose or surround themselves with different kinds of people?
Mm. I, so much of my time is with, seems to be with Leah and the dogs and the family. Uh, but those that I do tend to spend more time with seem to be ones that I share a faith with or share values with, especially those that are in our church. We spend a lot of time with members of our community group that have some common interest in studying Scripture and allowing Scripture to guide our lives. And of course, people that we have things in common with. Uh, it's interesting. We used to have these annual, we call them Holiday on Easy Street. That's the name of our street. Corte Facile translates to Easy Street. And
Hmm.
it started off with just inviting our neighbors since we didn't really know anyone here when we moved here. And then we started inviting others. And after several years, by the time our kids were in high school, Lee and I looked at each other and we realized, it seems like everybody that's here now are our kids' friends. The friends that we had were friends, parents of the kids that we grew up with. That they seemed to be the ones to have all the friends, and they sort of brought the parents along. But these were, parents and people that we had some things in common with as well.
Here's a question that one wouldn't necessarily always ask a new friend per se, but perhaps after one had gotten to know each other. But what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart in 2024? And how is that different than what broke your heart 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Has that changed?
Oh, that's a good question. It breaks my heart to see my elderly dad and my elderly in-laws experience Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
Both my dad and my father-in-law Alzheimer's, and to see that certainly breaks my heart. Especially knowing that they had such productive lives, great role models and hard workers for us. Breaks my heart to see that. Uh, it breaks my heart to see where our uh, country is today in terms of relationships. We seem to have lost the ability to be civil. And when someone disagrees with us, either politically or spiritually or things like that, is the default, certainly in social media and other places, to classify that individual not as somebody with a different view, but somebody that's an enemy or an adversary.
Hmm.
And we seem to have lost the ability of civility or appreciating what the individual brings and trying to judge people by different, uh, whatever difference you want to fill in the blank and judge them by that as opposed to the individual that is just a person trying to get through life, has their own challenges, has their own hurts, has their own dreams. So there's a couple of examples.
In terms of suffering, uh, there's different kinds of suffering. There's physical pain and there's psychological pain. Um, as I've gotten older, I've realized that health is really important, and
Yes.
dealing with sleep, diet, exercise, and genetics, those are the kind of the foundations for longevity. genetics you can't do anything about, but you can do something about sleep, diet, and exercise. But irrespective of that, as we get older, we start to have physical issues. And to your point on the Alzheimer's, psychological issues. How have you prepared yourself for your own getting older and seeing your kids and spouses and friends and so forth getting older? As at my age, you start losing friends
Mm.
through various health issues. How have you dealt with these issues as you've gotten to the point where you are today?
It feels like I'm still figuring that out, Ron, honestly. I mean, I am 62 years old. Leah just turned 60. And I remember her saying to me a few years ago, well, you know, Rodney, when you turned 60, that seemed to really bother you. And it did. It bothered me. It's really, I'm 60 now. And she said, I don't think that's going to affect me the same way. However, she turned 60 and she's in the hospital for 2 weeks and she's has other challenges and she's been on a leave of absence, finally back to work. But you see those things happen and it's like, okay, well, we didn't really expect those to happen because we were relatively healthy before then. Uh, that I've also been losing my hearing and thought a year ago I was probably going to have to either to retire or stop teaching classes. So I was in the process of preparing for that, and I shared with my clients. I said, "Yes, you know, I'm losing my hearing, so it's getting a little bit more challenging to have conversations with large classes like this." And two different clients said the same thing. They said, "You know, you're not going to stop. We'll do what we need to do to help support you."
Mm,
And that was the
mm.
greatest compliment I could get. They didn't want me to quit. They said, we'll make it work. And I think that's one thing that's a little bit different today than it was even 20, 30 years ago. You know, it was George Bush the first that signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I believe even through that act and how people behave is completely different because used to we would hide any disability that we had. Now, uh, don't necessarily need to hide it. You need to, figure out what accommodation is going to help me. So that's actually been nice.
So at 62, what would you say to that Rodney that's 10 years younger, like the 52-year-old or even the 42-year-old? What would you say to that person?
Lighten up, Bob. I
This
really
too
do.
shall pass. This
I
too shall
well,
pass.
I think I'd say lighten up. You know how much of my life I spent worrying, being concerned, having fear, as our family counselor said, manage your terror. Things that we worried about that, in a way, we needed to let go of. Concern about whether our kids were going to be on drugs or whether they were going to make it through a workshop or things like that. There are things that I worried about, which I have throughout my entire life, to where it's like I would have been a lot more fulfilling at that particular time in life if I hadn't worried so much.
That's one of those things that's easier said than done, of course. Lighten up. How do you do it from the perspective of a practical uh, way of lightening up? Okay, I want to lighten up. How
Yeah.
does one do that?
Well, I think there's several things. Number one, sometimes it requires a little help, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm in executive coaching, so I know even professionals that have been in the business world for years need a little help. to let go of some old baggage, to begin to think in new ways. So number one is I had to begin to think a little bit differently. Kind of let go of the fact that every morning I would wake up and think in my head, something would say to me, okay, Rodney, how are you going to screw this up? How are you going to fail today? And it's something I utilize with my clients and my coach did with me was, well, how many times have you failed? Or what are the odds that that's going to happen? And usually the odds were pretty rare that it was going to be a failure. Might not go as well, but chances of being a failure were pretty low. But in my head and in my mind, something said something to me. I don't know, at an early age that I couldn't add up. We call that the imposter syndrome. So that's one thing, is getting a little help. I think second is it's an indication of our faith. In a way, faith wise, it might be a bit of a sin, to be honest with you, to have constant fear of failure. I mean, what kind of faith is that? If you don't have faith that God's going to get you through the certain circumstances He promises to do that, to help you. And my favorite verse in the Bible is from the book of James: "Consider it pure joy when you encounter trials of various kinds, because the testing of your faith will produce endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result." So we've got to have faith that we are going to go through trials that are part of life. So I think those are really important. The last thing I'd mention is, Jesus does say, unless you become like little children, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. I do a little exercise at work where, let's see, what's the name of the activity? The Marshmallow Challenge. You can look it up. It's the Marshmallow Challenge, where you have to, with some spaghetti and a marshmallow and a little masking tape, and you got 18 minutes as a team to build the tallest freestanding structure with nothing but the marshmallow and then the spaghetti and the tape. And they say that the people that do the best on that activity, the people that do the worst are recent graduates of business school, MBA students. They do the worst because they go forward and they don't test it out. They want to have the perfect solution, so they don't test it along the way, and then they end up failing. And guess which group does amongst the best?
The children.
Recent graduates of kindergarten. And what they find is that the kindergartners do well because they're being spontaneous. They're having fun. They're not trying to have the best of the best. Oh, they're competitive, but they test it and it falls. They test it, build it again. Now, engineers and architects do pretty well too, but the recent graduates of kindergarten, because you know what? What does it mean to be like a child? It means to be spontaneous and have a little fun. Another place I think
Spontaneous
like that.
creativity, curiosity, resilience,
Yeah,
stubbornness, grit.
yeah, my kids seem to live that quite well.
So in the next, what would you say to the 72-year-old or the 82-year-old Rodney Jackson? Or what would you ask of that person?
Have you had your Flomax today? Start there. Have you taken your meds this morning? I'm already finding that that's probably going to be the case as I get a bit older. What would I say in the future?
Or ask of that person to give
Oh
you
my
a
gosh.
heads up.
Oh my. Well, that's only, 10 years away. So I want to ask, all right, well, give me some advice. I think that's what I'd ask. Give me some advice, especially, as I approach retirement, especially. What's the thing that you learned? How do I make these next few years the most fruitful, especially since there's some things that are beyond my control?
How do you deal with things that are beyond your control?
And then again, another spiritual example, but this is truly something that recently that happened a year ago, Ron, when I did the walk to Emmaus.
Mm-hmm.
You may recall me sharing that with you. The walk to Emmaus went down to on the Brazos River in Texas and spent a weekend with this ministry. And I remember the evening where we just get a chance to walk outside, and I'm sharing with one of the pastors there how discouraged I am that I'm losing my hearing, that I don't want to stop my job. I don't want to stop doing it. And we get into a conversation about it. And he says, well, what do you think you should do? I said, well, I guess I have to just give up control. He says, well, that's interesting. He said, it's kind of hard to give up control, something that you never had. And I was a little perplexed at that. And he said, well, I said, well, then what is it that I'm giving up? He said, well, I think it's about giving up your will, giving up your will. Going, well, that sounds a little challenging. And to realize that, God's will might have been a little different here, is that he may have a different calling for me at this stage in life, that he may not want me to continue consulting. Well, right now, I think he wants me to. And my client's response indicates that that's the case. And since the walk to Emmaus, I've had the best, most fulfilling year in business over this last year. It's been extremely fulfilling, and I think it's because I've had that gave me a new perspective.
Where do you find joy and delight in these days?
I think Lee and I have some routines that we enjoy. Just getting up in the day and cracking a joke with her. Just cracking a joke, or uh, you know,
Laughing?
being spontaneous with her,
Uh-huh.
and you know, cutting up with the dog. Before we even get going in the day, that brings a lot of joy. Watching her laughter, that brings a lot of joy.
You know, the internet is going to be around for a while, God willing. And in 100 years from now, if we can just imagine 100 years from now, perhaps the Jackson legacy will still be around, and there'll be how many generations in the next 100 years? 3 or 4 generations past. And if the internet still allows on YouTube, Instagram, whatever that would have the Rodney Jackson presence, they'd have the ability, those generations in the future will look at your picture, listen to your words. Will they have an idea of who my great, 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 great grandfather Rodney Jackson was in this
Yeah.
interview? And what would you say to them?
Well, would they in this interview? I don't know, but another place that I would want on my tombstone, or whatever we have to remember us in the internet, maybe the virtual tombstone 100 years from now, but I'd want it to say he helped others realize their potential.
Mm.
That's one of the missions in my work, is helping others realize their potential. To look at things through a different light, to change the way you're operating, to change the way you're thinking about things. And in my world of leadership development and and executive coaching, that's what I love. I love having a conversation with someone, and oftentimes it's not about giving advice. It's just about a bit like what you're doing. You're asking the provocative, insightful question to help people think differently.
You know, I've always maintained that the term quantum entanglement sounds like a physicist term, but there really is a connection between all of us humans where we have common needs, the need to be understood, the need to understand, the need to get answers to our questions of life, existential questions. And we're still all connected. That's what's the intriguing part of, 10,000 years ago, our emotional intelligence isn't much different than it is in 2024 as it was 10,000 years ago. And so the connection that those generations in the future, in the next 100 years, they'll really resonate with hearing your words, Rodney. So I hope that um, we'll have an opportunity to chat more as we go through life for as long as God will have us here on this earth. So, do you have any parting comments that you want to make for those future generations, or even those people that are still around and know you and love you, Rodney?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, we do only have this one life, and carpe diem is a phrase that I just love. I'll every once in a while my daughter or son will send a text about something that's going on, and that's what I'll put on there, carpe diem.
Mm.
The movie Dead Poet Society came out several years ago, and there's an opening scene where Robin Williams says carpe diem, seize the day, seize the day.
Well, Rodney, I really love your altruism and your generosity and all the things that make you who you are, and the way that you're consulting is really an encouragement for those of us that know you. So thank you for your time, and thank you for doing a mulligan
Well,
as
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it, Ron. Thanks for the questions. They're really, really thought provoking. I always enjoy talking with you.